Hogwarts Legacy is a game I was confused about for so long. Between the constant rambling of its controversy, I was trying to figure out just what the game was. Many described it as a Harry Potter Souls-like, and to that end, I wasn't that engaged. I didn't play this game to be rebellious to the waves of people telling me not to play it. I played it because it was a great excuse to get into Harry Potter, a piece of pop culture that I had neglected despite it being a small piece of my childhood. Other members of my family are more into it, and even some of my friends have more history with the franchise than I. So, I watched all of the movies, didn't play the game, and I can firmly say that this is the lamest possible way a Harry Potter game could have turned out. Almost every single ounce of this game is steeped in mediocrity. At first, I thought this issue was caused by the fact that this universe is not a fun one to explore, and I don't mean that in terms of its rules and ideas. I meant by going somewhere and actually seeing something, but I soon came to the realization that they were actually trying to go for immersion, and they failed royally. That's because every time they try to immerse you in the world, it just falls flat. It gives you all of this shit to do and then it just does nothing with it. Every issue with the game branches out from the basic fundamentals of what it means to be a student at Hogwarts. First of all your classes are nothing more than a quick cutscene and some simple button inputs. The first time you do it, that is. They have one simple assignment for you to complete, and then after every single instance, it's a quick cutscene that gives you some sense of illusion that you actually attend the school. This makes it extra difficult to care when all your professors show up near the end of the story to aid you in the final battle, because at this point, you've only done one real class with them and a handful of extra assignments to learn some spells. This breaks the immersion because for all intents and purposes, you have no reason to interact with anyone in the game except for Professor Fig, because he's really the only person who can progress the story for you. Being at Hogwarts is one of the biggest letdowns in the game. Now, for some of you saying that this game couldn't have taken the same approach as the movies by having an ensemble cast of characters, I want you to realize that they instead went in the opposite way with the story. I'm trying to envision this through the lens of someone who's been a fan of this universe for far longer than me and sees this game as their opportunity to live out their fantasy of going to this magical school. Each class is given one main quest in the story, and after that, there's nothing. You interact with students in only a couple of the classes, and sometimes it leads to you doing one small side piece of whatever your class is doing. If the game is going for immersion, then this breaks that immersion because now you never feel connected to anything. There are parts of the school that I never went to because I never felt the need to. This reeks of something that I've noticed in other games, the sense of obligation to put something into a game without carefully wondering if it should be in the game. These classes should have been full interactive experiences instead of just quick-time events and fucking mini-games. The majority of my time shouldn't be spent flying from one insanely far away landmark to the next. It should be getting myself acquainted with my classmates. Once you get deep enough into the game and realize that your choice of house at the beginning doesn't really change at all, besides what room you wake up in and who you're going to be forced to talk to when you first start, you realize that there's just nothing here. See, I chose Gryffindor because I'm a basic bitch, and when I really should have chose Slytherin because my character is kind of an evil bitch, and when I did this starting quest of talking to my other housemates, I thought this would be the small introduction to interacting with them a bit more, doing quests and maybe building some relationships with them. Instead, the Gryffindor student that the game does pair you with is someone who I'm sure isn't even in the common room when you first start the game. Imagine how much fun the game would have been, and the potential replay value if each house had 3 or more friends that you could take out with you on quests or other expeditions out into the world. Running around the school becomes exhausting immediately. You're giving so many flame checkpoints to teleport between that it makes actually walking a chore. And you can make that argument for any open world really, but the problem here is that with the exceptions of the classrooms, you have no reason to go anywhere else in the school because the game just takes you to special locations for some quests that already take place inside of the school. And the open world is fucking ass. I am not joking when I say that this might be the most boring open world that I've ever explored. Why do you need 3 different mount options? You get a broomstick, a flying creature, and a goddamn monster hunter enemy. The broomstick is the only one that's necessary in any given situation because you can just fly over enemies and just go wherever you want as soon as you get it. Me and some of my friends tried to imagine this game if it was more like Persona 5, because honestly, that makes every part of this game but the ideas in the open world more interesting. Persona already has tons of social links and you can already see how the concept can be transferred over to a game set at Hogwarts, and all of the other places outside of Hogwarts could have just been done in the same way as it is in Persona. They could just unlock when somebody mentions that you have to go there for a quest instead of flying there at a really slow speed. I understand that some people wanted things like flying on a broomstick to beat in their Harry Potter game, but with how exploration works, it's pointless to do anything else. If the game was like this, then the story could have been longer with more shit to explore instead of whole sections of the map being taken up with fucking nothing, and you could have had a whole cast of characters who have their own side plots that don't need to connect to the main story and could just be about them. This is what they try to do in the main story, but only with 3 characters, but I'll talk more in detail about them later. This means that there are no interesting characters in Hogwarts, well, except for one. I hesitate in calling those character quests interesting, but they just seem like the best of a bad lot. I was expecting the headmaster would play a bigger role in the story, but he's not there. for the whole majority of it. He seriously disappears for the entire game until the very ending. And since you spend so much time outside of the school doing fucking whatever, you never actually get to absorb anything happening inside the school. If the game had a scheduling system with certain parts of the day being taken up with classes and other parts of the day being reserved for side quests, then maybe it could be better to balance all of these things. I saw some potential in the early game when I was approached by Sebastian and asked to join a secret dueling club, and it was exciting because you get to pit yourself against other students and actually have fun fighting them. But this quest is so fucking short, and that really makes me upset because there was nothing else like this in the entire game. Imagine what this quest could have led to, other students having their own clubs, or better yet, smaller groups who have their own things going on. It really could have been anything, and yet they didn't even try. I really wish more things fed into each other. Moving around Hogwarts is really boring because there was never a moment where I actually wanted to stop and talk to anybody. I could just tell from what the game was forcing me to do that no one had anything interesting to say or do. This is a problem that a lot of open world games fall into. Everything that doesn't have to do with the main story just feels tacked on to make the runtime longer. One more thing that's weird about the NPCs is the way that they talk to each other. Just stand anywhere in the game and you'll hear them having the strangest conversations. One character will say something and then the next person will be responding to something that's completely different.
Life seems rather dull in the hamlets around here. I'd much rather live in a big city like London.
I have family in Eyndale. Father wants me to visit them, but I haven't had the time or the inclination.
Thomas Brown knows more about books than anyone. Well, perhaps not Madam Scribner, but anyone else, I'd say.
I adore shopping in Hogsmeade after it snowed. It's so... what's the word? Magical.
Also, I also just thought about this. They also name every single NPC in the game, I think. So it's honestly kind of even more sad that none of them have really that much interesting shit to say. If you're going to painstakingly name every single student in the school, then you could have at least, I don't know, tried to make them interesting instead of these weird fucking conversations that they have. 90% of the time, if you aren't fighting enemies, then you're just looking for field guide pages and checking off boxes. Finding the field guide pages is pretty exciting at first because they're pretty quick and kind of fun, but then you realize that they don't really do anything. They give you this massive book at the beginning of the game, and right after you take it, they just tell you to fill it with a bunch of useless shit that doesn't reward anything interesting. The only thing that it does reward is clothes and armor. And I'm gonna be a bit too honest here, but this game has some of the worst fucking fashion I've ever seen in an RPG. Like, look at this shit. I look like a fucking homeless person. Sometimes I look like an old fucking woman. Is this what British people wear all the time? It took me a minute before my friend told me that I can just activate my glims to make myself look however I want it, but at that point, why do you even have gear slots, and why not just have whole outfits or something? The fact that there are already 6 gear slots is ludicrous. 95% of the time when you loot gear, you never get anything better than what you're already wearing. So for the entire game, the only things you're looting for is shit that is worse than what you already have on. It also makes no sense that the Trials of Merlin try to increase your gear slots, because once you realize that all the gear is shit, you just sell it to buy better gear. And I hate how they stupidly give you this fucking magic loom to upgrade your gear. It's even worse because they also use this loom to make you apply special abilities to the gear, like increased damage against with certain spells, or less damage received from certain enemies like goblins. But why can't you just apply these abilities to the player themselves? Why isn't this like some sort of special slot system like in any other RPG like the Talismans in Elden Ring? This could allow you to build your character in interesting ways. There could even be some crafted from someone in Gryffindor or whatever house you chose that could be of a very special set. Why not have these special skills already applied to the armor set so that they become more exciting to find? Because if I have to fight my way through a fucking dungeon filled with zombies that can only be damaged by 1 or 2 of my spells that are on cooldowns for a fucking scarf that increases my defense by 1 goddamn point, then I'm going to be pissed. There seriously needed to be better rewards instead of just choosing to wear a different colored pair of gloves. I haven't even started talking about the combat and story in full detail yet, and I already hate most of this shit. So much of your time is eaten up by this menial bullshit that there isn't any actual content in the game. Just dozens and dozens of minigames spread throughout this empty landscape that I'm left wondering who considers this fun. Combat in Hogwarts Legacy can be described in one sentence. No matter what you do, you will always win. That may seem like a compliment, but with the exception of bosses like the giant golems and the final boss, I never found combat to be that challenging or interesting. Most enemies stay at a distance and you can just use the basic cast to defeat them most of the time. The most basic combo that I found myself using throughout the entire game was Actio and then Incendio. Sometimes I would add another spell to complement it, but that was just me, for the whole game. I can't really emphasize how boring the combat becomes after a while. It almost had the opposite effect of other boring combat systems where whenever I came across enemies, I wasn't sad by the fact that the combat would be terrible. It would be that I wouldn't be doing anything interesting. This may also come to some strange design choices. First off, the lock-on in this game is terrible, and I think that's because the game has two lock-ons. One basic one that you can toggle, and another one that automatically locks onto enemies that you are either looking at or that are in your vicinity. This is fine in other games because most of the time the enemies just gather around you to kill you, but here they stand like 30 feet away from you, which means you can hit something from off-screen and sometimes miss, and I have to wonder how that's even possible. Sometimes you can kill an enemy and instead of the game locking onto the next available one, you can just aim mindlessly at a dead fucking body. There are times where you can get through a battle with no problem whatsoever, and then there are times where it feels like the game is fighting you, because some enemies have shields that require you to use certain spells in order to break them before you can start damaging them. And even if you are staring into a goblin's eyes lovingly, you can miss because his best friend is right next to him and the game decides that he should get hit instead. This would be fine except for the fact that the game has cooldowns for your spells, so if you see an enemy that has a yellow shield and you fire a yellow spell at it, but it hits someone else, then you need to pray that you assign another spell in a different slot and try again, and even then, you might still miss again because the game chose the wrong enemy for you to hit. Some of you might think that applying all of one spell type to one loadout might be a good idea, but the game wants you to be comboing spells, so it's more efficient to just have each loadout have whatever combo you want to do at any given time. I really like the skill tree in the game. It's one of the better skill trees in open world games since it unlocks new abilities for things you already have in a way that feels like an immediate upgrade instead of something you have to spend hours of game time trying to understand. The Incendio upgrade is great because it projects an AoE, and in conjunction with the Accio upgrade that lets me grab more than one enemy, I found this to be really fun, and that's why I spend most of the game with just that basic combo. Then there's brewing potions, which isn't as fun as you might think. Most of them I never use because I don't see the need to use an invisibility potion in combat when I can just run away while in the overworld, and if I'm in a dungeon I have no choice but to fight them so I can progress. So of course the only potions that I cared about are the ones that healed me and increased my damage. And I think this just goes to show how lackluster some of the design of this game is. You can skip out on many parts of this game's design and it never feels like you're missing out on something, because it was never going to help in the first place. This is what I hate so much about open world games. They just exist to be the sandbox so that the player does fucking whatever without caring. It doesn't matter what the context is as long as the game provides some semblance of the experience that just should be there. I don't feel like a wizard or a student at Hogwarts. By any means, I should realistically be someone from the ministry because it feels like they would be doing any of the shit that I'm doing in this game. And it sucks that there are no interesting bosses in this game. You fight so many trolls that God of War 2018 is jealous. The smaller enemies are also lame. It's just a bunch of goblins and random dark wizards. The game seriously needed better enemy variety and more bosses. For the bosses, I don't even need to explain what they could have added. If you've seen the Harry Potter movies, then you can just see all the potential monsters that they could have added as threats. And this brings me closer to the story because if your rebuttal to all this is that more monsters and shit like that wouldn't make any sense since it's so close to the school, then why is anything else happening this close to Hogwarts that takes place in the story? Look, I know I'm not the biggest Harry Potter nerd, but I doubt that anything else in this franchise will be as boring as this story. For starters, I want to bring up how the field guide just flat out spoils how long the story is, and by the time I realized that there were only 10 main quests left, it seriously felt like nothing had happened. Then they try really hard to make your character feel special, but it comes off so forced. You have the ability to see traces of ancient magic, and they never really explain what that means. Once again, this makes everyone seeing you as this awesome person strange because, for all intents and purposes, we're actually worse than some of the students. And as the story went on, I found that my character was just doing whatever I was told without barely questioning anything. This led me to believe that there will be some twist where it's revealed that these keepers you're actually listening to are kind of evil, but no, nothing happened. The character side quests, and by characters I mean the trio of Sebastian, Natsai, and Poppy, all have their own things going on that they want you to help with. That's not my issue. My issue is that these questlines feel like they were ripped out of the story to be used as side content so the game feels like it has, well, some good side content. When in reality, if you put these side quests back into the main story, then everything feels a bit more important. Sebastian wants you to join his Shadow Money Wizard gang just so you can discover a way to cure his sister, who he believes was cursed by Goblin. Natsai wants you to track down a man named Harlow, who was the right-hand man of one of the main villains, Rookwood, and Poppy wants you to help her defeat the poachers who have been capturing and selling animals from around the Highlands. All of these quests tie back to the main story in some way. Well, except for Poppy's quest, but that's fine because games like this have at least one plot line that isn't directly connected to the main story but can still make some sort of sense in existing, and that's the problem here. These stories make sense for existing, but they are separated from the main path. When you realize how little you actually do for the main path, it makes these character quest lines less engaging because it isn't actually changing anything. Harlow works for Rookwood, as I've already said, and Rookwood is revealed to be the one that cursed Anne. But since these are disconnected like this, it doesn't even matter. You don't even bring them up until the final battle. Instead, your professors show up, and it's not just the professors that are lame, the villains are even worse. One of them is a goblin with strange magical powers who turns out to be a fucking dragon for the final boss. And Rookwood is just like a normal-ass guy until you kill him. Yeah, I mean that. You just kill him, and you also kill Harlow too, and pretty much every other goblin that you come across. Your character also speaks about this like they sort of enjoy it. I'm perfectly fine with my character killing people in games, but I'm trying to figure out what the hell the game is going for here. Like I said, this just breaks the immersion in a way that makes me feel uncomfortable. The villains also barely show up through the story, and whenever they do, you just either hide from them or run away. It's not until Rookwood literally kidnaps you at the end of the game and you're forced to fight him. And it's not until Ranrock shows up at the final battle that you're also forced to fight him. The rest of the story is pretty lame, especially since the quest design is so fucking boring. You just go to caves and mines and catacombs to fight some enemies and maybe bring back an item or two. Some of the weirdest quests have you bringing other students into these with you, just so that they can do something that you should have learned to do. Think about it for a second. There's a quest where you drag another student into a mine so that they can read another language. Now, on one hand, I would be saying that we should have been able to learn this ourselves, with gameplay and story mixing and making your efforts in the school pay off in the open world. But on the other hand, I could imagine myself saying that if we didn't bring this kid, then I would say that there has to be someone in the school who could read gobbledygook for us, and once again also incorporate gameplay and story by, making those social links just be more options in quests. So I guess the issue here is that it's so cut and dry, because after you do this quest, you never have to speak to this kid again. Two quests that I really want to point out as being wholly different than everything else are the third secret quest and the one right before that. In the first quest, you have to use a polyjuice potion to impersonate the headmaster of the school in order to get his house elf to tell you the password to his office. You have to go around the entire school, and you can even stop and talk to people and have actual conversations that are pretty fucking funny. I seriously have to question why all the quests aren't like this. Just like the Dueling Club quest, this feels like something that should be happening in a game set at Hogwarts. Weird magical shenanigans that are both charming and introspective about the characters. It blows my mind that this is the only one of the quests in the game that feels this way. I wish they had gone one step further and made it to where you have to look for the ingredients to the polyjuice potion yourself. Then maybe the open world could be justified. The other great quest happens right after this, surprisingly, with the third secret trial. You get trapped in this comic book style dimension where you are forced to stealth your way through this army of death spirits and then you have to face off against a horde of enemies. I am not exaggerating when I say that this is the first time that I have felt tense during a stealth section in a video game. It even makes the combat great because the enemies come at you so quickly that you need to carefully plan out your attacks. It even has you using the items from the Deathly Hallows story in a way that feels genuine instead of being forced into the game. Having these death spirits show up near the end of the game as a new enemy type would have been fantastic. The game does have different transitions of time, but nothing really changes. I hope this illustrates my point here. Why are these quests so good, but every other quest is so boring? Why does it feel like I'm never actually doing anything in this universe? This extends to Sebastian's questline. Sebastian was the best character in the game until he wasn't. If you already know, then you learn the unforgivable curses in this questline, and, this is what I mean when I talk about obligations. You have these spells that aren't that fun once you realize how easy the strategy is for cursing every single enemy and then just using Avada Kedavra. Almost everything in this game falls apart once you put it together like this, and I'm not certain if they're going to add multiplayer because, how would that even work? Quidditch isn't even in the game, and it's obvious why. They didn't know how to make something like Quidditch work in a video game, but I feel that with some time and effort, you could make it work. Make the flying controls a bit more, expressive, and maybe it could work. But if that's not the case, then what else does this game have? I watched all of the movies and believe that you can make a pretty fun game if you use the basic elements of being at Hogwarts and build on them to make a worthwhile experience. But they didn't. They just used the basic elements in the most basic way possible. And because of that, this game doesn't feel special at all. The idea of a Harry Potter game should be cool, but sadly, this is what we got. Or at least, this is what longtime fans got. Because I play this as a new fan of Harry Potter and someone who likes video games. And somehow, I feel like I didn't even get anything. And the fact that they aren't making any DLC really solidifies that this is another mediocre open world game. So, would I recommend this? Not really. Whether you're a fan or not, there is simply nothing here for you.